Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we winter sow ladies' mantle seeds. So let's go. I've made a lot of videos showing you my process for winter sowing plants. What I'll do is put a link to the playlist down below in case you're interested. I really am enjoying this series of videos because I like doing a plant profile as well. Because if you don't have these plants in your yard or in your landscape, then it's something to consider after learning more about each of the plants that I'm winter sowing. And after all, starting perennials from seed is absolutely the cheapest way to have perennials in your garden, which is a big reason why I like to sow the seeds of lots of plants, including those of perennials. If you've already watched a lot of my winter sowing videos, or if you're very familiar with the winter sowing process, feel free to jump to the timestamp shown at the bottom of the screen. Winter sowing is the process of sowing seeds outdoors during the winter months. You can simply scatter the seeds out on the ground, or you can sow the seeds in some sort of a container or pot. When it comes to what kind of container or pot to use, there are so many different choices out there. The big thing is you want to make sure it's translucent or clear. I like to use milk jugs, but I know other people have used juice jugs, rotisserie chicken containers, totes. The possibilities are endless. The big thing is, no matter what container you choose, you want to make sure that it can hold at least 4 inches of soil in it. Your containers should have holes in the top to allow water or moisture to come in. The containers should also have holes in the bottom to allow for proper drainage of water. I like to use potting mix. You can use whatever works for you. The key is to make sure that it's well draining and also that it retains some moisture. You don't want to use a seed starting mix because it's too light, too fluffy, and it will dry out way too quickly. You also don't want to use garden soil because it's very heavy and it's too compacted, which makes it difficult for roots to grow in. There are a ton of benefits when it comes to winter sowing. It's very easy to do, it's cheap. It doesn't require any additional equipment. You don't need any grow lights. You don't need any room inside your house. Another benefit to the winter sowing process is that the seeds will get a natural cold stratification period. That's very important for certain seeds such as perennial seeds. And in the end, your seedlings will be stronger, they'll be healthier, and they'll already be hardened off. You don't need to do the whole hardening off process like you would have to do if you started your plants indoors. Now, there is a certain timeline that you want to follow when it comes to winter sowing. If you start your seeds too early, there is a chance that those seeds will germinate prematurely, and if you get a cold snap, some of those plants that germinate quickly can die. However, if you start your seeds too late, what will happen is certain seeds, like the ones I talked about earlier that need a certain period of cold stratification time, they might not get that full period of cold stratification that those seeds need. So timing is everything. Now, of course, when it comes to the timing, it's going to vary from location to location. A general guideline is you do your winter sowing sometime starting in the month of December, but you want to be done with it sometime about 2 to 3 weeks before your average last frost date. But I want to give you a more specific timeline that I'm going to be following and that you can follow as well. So about 5 to 6 months before your average last frost date, you want to be sowing seeds that are requiring a cold stratification period. And those are usually perennials that are hardy in your area where you live. About 3 to 4 months before your average last frost date, that's a great time to be starting cold hardy plants. Plants that can tolerate cold, but also plants that reseed very easily in your area. Approximately 1 to 2 months before your average last frost date is a good time to start plants that are not cold hardy, plants that do better in warmer temperatures. Now, keep in mind though that when those seeds germinate, if you are going to have a cold snap, if you're going to have some cold nights, cold days, you want to protect those seedlings. You may need to cover them during that time. You may need to bring in your containers just for a few nights during those cold snaps. Don't be discouraged if you're running out of containers for winter sowing. Even though there are a lot of containers you can use, I prefer to use milk jugs. In fact, one year when I didn't have that many milk jugs, I contacted a local Starbucks. I asked them if they could hold some milk jugs for me. Well, they go through so many milk jugs a day, they were more than happy to hold a few bags for me. So definitely reach out to local coffee shops if you're looking for some sort of containers that are translucent or clear. Some people like to pre-moisten their potting mix, and that is totally fine to do. The reason you won't see me doing it in my winter sowing videos is because it is frozen outside during the months of January and February. So I'm just giving a small amount of water, but then I'm placing the milk jugs outside where they're going to be frozen for a long time. And as soon as the weather warms up, I'll start watering the milk jugs more often. In order to keep your milk jugs from flying around, you can always corral them together and then put some sort of a barrier around them just to keep them together. There are a lot of different options out there. You can use some sort of temporary fencing, you can use some sort of bricks or stones. You can be creative, but just be sure that your milk jugs are not toppling over and blowing around in the wind. We'll start with the quick plant profile, and after that I'll show you my process for winter sowing the lady's mantle seeds. For many years I had lady's mantle up along the driveway on the left-hand side. There's a small flower bed there, and the lady's mantle patches grew over time. They look so pretty there. I really enjoyed them. However, last year I did dig a lot of them up, and what I did was I made a video showing you my process for digging them up, dividing them, and then I potted them all up, and they're currently in my backyard plant nursery. The reason that they're there is this year I'm planning to take all those lady mantle plants that I dug up and move them all around my yard. And I can't wait because honestly I love this plant and I think it's going to look very pretty sprinkled throughout the yard. A fun fact about the leaves on lady's mantle plants is that they're known for holding water droplets after rain or after watering. The droplets glisten in the sun and can be seen in the morning after a dew. Lady's mantle is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9 and it's native in certain parts of Europe. It has those beautiful yellow blooms that are in the summer months, but afterwards the plant is still very pretty just for its foliage. It thrives in full sun, but you can put it in a part sun situation as well, and it grows anywhere from between 1 to 3 feet in height. The plant does well in well-draining soil, and the flowers on it attract the bees, the butterflies, and even the flies. Even though lady's mantle is considered to be deer and rabbit resistant, you know how it goes. If there's not enough food out there and the animals are hungry enough, they may end up browsing on these plants. Although it's not considered invasive here where I live in New Hampshire, it is considered invasive in certain parts of Alaska as well as the Pacific Northwest of the United States. This medicinal plant is very easy to propagate. You can propagate it through division. You can also propagate it by having its seeds just drop at the base of the plant, since it does self-seed very readily. And then it can also be propagated through seeds, which is what we're going to be doing today. The seeds need light to germinate, so you want to make sure that you're just pressing the seeds into the surface soil. And if you are going to cover them, you only want to cover them just barely with maybe 1/8 of an inch of seed starting, potting mix, or vermiculite. In order to ensure a better rate of germination, you want to make sure you give the seeds a cold stratification period. And that's basically just exposing the seeds to a period of cold. And that period of cold is going to vary from plant to plant. When it comes to lady's mantle, they prefer a cold period between 3 to 4 weeks. I'll be achieving that by doing the winter sowing process. Where I live right now, it is still very cold out. You want to make sure that the seeds are getting a consistent 40-degree or below temperature for at least 3 to 4 weeks. If you live in an area that's not going to get that kind of temperature, you can always take the seeds and you can put them in your refrigerator for 3 to 4 weeks. After that, you can take the seeds and you can sow them in your landscape. You can winter sow, or you can put them in a pot and put them under grow lights and grow them on indoors. And if you do choose to sow the seeds indoors, you want to sow them about 6 to 8 weeks before your average last frost date. And if you don't know what your average last frost date is, I'll provide a link down below where you can enter in your zip code and also look at a map to see what your average last frost date is. Or you can just do a quick search on the internet and it will tell you what your frost date is based on your location. The seeds will germinate when the soil temperature is between 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you are starting the seeds indoors and you're starting them in a cooler room than that, then you may need to add some bottom heat, and you can do that by using a seedling heat mat. The seeds take a little bit of time to germinate. It might take anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks, so you want to be patient. And I'm going to have to remember that when I am putting this milk jug outside, and come springtime, when I start seeing germination in other containers, I might not see these seeds germinating for a little while after. When you grow lady's mantle from seed, don't expect blooms the first year. It'll still be very pretty in the landscape because of its leaves, but you might not see the blooms until the second year. So next we're going to go ahead and winter sow our lady's mantle seeds. I'm new to this seed company. I've never bought their seeds before. It's called Strictly Medicinal Seeds. I bought the seeds from a local garden center, but you can also go to the website and check out what other seeds they have. But you'll notice that the company is based out of Oregon, and there's some information, just in case you're interested, about what the seeds need in order to germinate. There are so many different containers you can use for winter sowing, but regardless, no matter what container you're using, always make sure it's a clean container. And you want to be sure, no matter what container you're using, it can hold about 4 inches of potting soil. You can see that that goes right around here. So when I make my cut, I want to make sure I'm cutting around here, but I also need this part here. I don't want to cut into it because this will be the handle to open and close my mini greenhouse. I'm going to need something sharp to cut my mini greenhouse or my milk jug. So I'm going to be using these. You can use scissors or anything else that you have. These are just cutting shears or snips that you would use to cut tin. I threw away the cap because I want to leave this part open. Whatever container you use, you want to make sure that you have some sort of holes in the top of it to allow for water like rain or snow to come in here, and that will help keep everything nice and moist inside of your mini greenhouse. And if for whatever reason you're not getting any moisture and things are drying out, you can always add water into this hole as well. I do like to add additional holes in the top here, but that's completely optional. I've been doing it for years and that's worked for me. You also want to add drainage holes in the bottom of your container. That will allow water to come out if there's too much water in here. And it also allows it so if you want to bottom water your container, you can easily do that because then the water can wick up and it can water the soil and the seedlings that are in here. I always like to add more than less holes in the bottom because I want to make sure that this container has good drainage. And that's all I'm going to add for holes. It's a small container. If this was a much larger container, then maybe I'd add some additional holes in the center here. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut my container. Some people like to use a marker and make a line. I'm not going to worry about that. It doesn't need to be a perfect line. I'm just going to start somewhere around here and I'm going to make my way onto the other side. Now I'm going to stop because I don't want to cut all the way through. I want to have an area here and here. And the reason for that is I want to make sure that I'm using the handle as a hinge for my mini greenhouse. And notice they don't perfectly line up, and that is totally okay. Next, I'm going to go ahead and get some potting mix filled into the bottom of this container. I like to use potting mix, not seed starting mix. I find that it's better for holding the water and also it doesn't dry out as quickly. And I'm actually using potting mix that I made myself, and I'll put a link down in the description below on how to make your own potting mix. It saves a lot of money in the long run. The next thing is to push down lightly, not very hard. I'm trying to eliminate any sort of air pockets that might be in here. But I also don't want to press down too hard because as the plants start growing and their roots are forming, you want to make sure that the roots can grow inside of this potting mix. You know, I've tried to look for the ladies' mantle seeds and I've never had success. This year I'm going to try harder. So the seed packet had about 50 seeds in it, so we're going to be sowing all the seeds into our milk jug. It's really up to you how many seeds you want to place inside of your containers. There's really no right or wrong in my opinion. It all comes down to personal preference. And it comes down to the seed also. A lot of times if I'm sowing the seeds for a plant that doesn't like to have its roots disturbed, then I tend to not heavily sow those seeds. Poppies are the only ones that I feel okay doing that because I'll be doing the hunk of seedling method. But otherwise, I'm okay with most plants and just putting down a bunch of seeds in the container. Because my goal is as soon as there's one set of true leaves on here, I'll be pricking out these plants and I'm going to be potting them up into containers. But you don't have to do that. If you wanted to, you could take your seedlings out and put them right in your landscape. Again, it has to do with personal preference. Next, I'm just going to press down on the seeds. Remember, we're not covering the seeds because the seeds need light to germinate. A lot of times if a seed packet says that the seeds need light to germinate or to surface sow the seeds, that's what it means, is you don't want to cover them. The only reason you might see someone putting vermiculite on there is vermiculite keeps a little bit of the moisture in there, but it still allows some light to come through. Another reason that we're pressing the seeds into the soil is we want to make sure that the seeds make good contact with the soil. I'm using a garden marker, and I like to add a label inside my container just in case the label on the outside gets worn off. Although I like to use garden markers because typically they don't wear off as much as a Sharpie or a pen do. I'm just using this small hand water pump sprayer. You can use whatever you want to water your potting mix as well as your seeds. And I'm giving it just a gentle spray. I don't want to give it a very heavy spray because I don't want to dislodge any of the seeds. And remember, you may need to moisten all of your potting mix. Where I live, as soon as I bring this outside, this is going to freeze, and it's going to stay frozen for days. And there will be some snow and rain that may come inside of here. But the main thing is it will be frozen, so I won't really need to add any more additional water to this, probably for the next month and a half to 2 months. I'm just using a paper towel to wipe the sides because I find it's easier to stick the duct tape onto the container if it's dry. I'm just using duct tape to seal my container shut. I know some people like to punch holes in the top as well as the bottom of their container, and then they like to close it using some sort of a twisty tie or pipe cleaner, and that seems to work well. So use whatever you want to close your container as long as you're able to easily open it on the days when it gets really hot outside, because you don't want to burn your seedlings. But then on the days that it's kind of cold and you need to protect them, you need to be able to close this. Since we're sowing perennial seeds, I'm not too worried about it getting too cold in here. And the reason is these are hardy perennials in my zone. So since I typically winter sow perennials first, December, January, and February, I only add a few pieces of the tape on my container. There's really no use in me adding tape all the way around the container because even if some cold comes in here, it's not going to kill off these perennial plants once they start germinating. They'll be fine. And they're not going to germinate anyway until the soil conditions are right, and it's usually much later into the spring season. Now, when I start winter sowing plants that are not hardy, say vegetables or annuals that are not hardy in my area, then I may need to add tape all the way around. But I'm not going to worry about it now for my perennials. I've never done this before. I've only added 2 pieces or 3 pieces of tape, and I've always had success. I'm pushing down. I want to make sure that the tape is sticking to my container. I'm going to use my garden marker again, and I'm just going to label what the plant is in here. I used to label it directly on the container itself, but I actually like to reuse my containers. They usually last 2 to 3 seasons. So instead, I now label it on my tape. Some people, instead of putting in the plant name on the tape, they like to number it. So they might put a number 1, and then number 1 on a piece of paper or a spreadsheet would be the plant name. So Rebecca. Number 2 might be lupin. Number 3, foxglove, and so on. So I'm just going to put down lady's mantle. And I'm going to put it on this side as well, although that's optional. You don't need to do that. I like to put it on the other side just because when I'm picking up the milk jugs, it just makes it easier because sometimes I pick it up from this side, sometimes I pick it up from that side. The milk jug is going to get placed in a full sun location where it gets access to rain or snow through this hole right here. And if there isn't enough water coming in where you live, then you want to make sure you're adding additional water because you don't want whatever's in here to dry out. You also want to make sure that you're placing your containers in an area where they're not going to blow around in the wind. This is the reality of my situation, and now you know why I have been doing so much winter sowing. Although you don't need snow to do winter sowing, just keep that in mind. We have that nice cool temperature, which is perfect for my perennials right now. But I literally could be sowing anything I want right now, and the seeds will germinate whenever they're ready. I'm just sticking with perennials as well as cool flowers for the simple reason that I just have so many seeds I still need to sow. And in fact, I just want to show you, I have milk jugs all the way back over there. So you better believe it, I don't need to add additional water in here. We have more snow coming, and where I live, water is not an issue. But where you live, you might still need to water things. And if I run out of room over there for my milk jugs, I have more room over here. I'll be calling Starbucks soon because I'm running out of milk jugs. I'll be sure to make an update video once the lady's mantle seeds have germinated. I'll also show you my next steps for pricking them out of the winter sown containers and then potting them up or putting the seedlings out in my landscape. Let me know in the comments below if you have ladies mantle in your landscape or if you've ever started the plant from seed. I'm really excited to finally start this plant from seed because I've never done it before. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.